Hello, good evening everybody, and first of all I'd like to wish everybody a happy new year. I hope you had a lovely Christmas and now we get down to business again. So happy new year to everybody. We're not intending having any fire alarms. If we do, all follow me because I'll be first out. And we will gather on the car park. So with that, no further ado, we will start with the agenda properly. Thank you. Item 1, apologies.
Yes, Chair. Apologies tonight from Councillors Cruz and Raw, and no substitutes.
I'll have to apologise, we'll have to leave at 7:30.
Let's hope we've finished by then, guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Item 2, approval of minutes of previous meeting. All in favour? All in favour?
Yeah, that's unanimous.
Item 3, public participation. Don't believe we've got any public members in. Item 4, any interests?
I think this is a question for Sandra really. When it's the section on rewards and recognition, Sandra, do I really need to leave for that?
I understand the nature of your interest, which you'll need to declare, but it's not direct because it doesn't concern the individual. So if you'd like to declare the interest as an indirect pecuniary. Yeah.
Can I declare an interest because I'm married to one of the members of staff here?
Does that have to be? No, we'll register the declaration.
Item 5, questions.
They're non-table, Chair.
Thank you. So we move on to item 6, external audit fee letter for 2018-19. I'm going to bring in Gavin Bartley just to go on the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This letter is the final act of the 2018-19 audit, which is a request for an additional fee of £750. It's set out in some detail in the letter the reasons for the additional fee. We did have to carry out significant additional work as a result of queries around pensions, which was a national issue around the MacLeod judgment. We feel as though we've been very fair-minded in the additional fee we've requested. We've borne some of the additional cost ourselves. Discussed this with the head of resources, who thought it was reasonable, I think. And also we have to get approval from Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, which manage the contractual arrangements.
Excuse me, sorry, Gavin. Could you actually just put the mic a bit closer? Because I think everybody's craning the neck to be able to hear you.
Right.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's a bit better. Public Sector Audit Appointments also have to approve this, and they have done so. So that's the background to it, but I'm quite happy to answer any questions that members might have if there are any. Thank you.
Your invitation is there for a question. Nobody? Councillor Purdy.
No questions. I mean, Mazat have been fair. They gave us a heads up on this, so I'm happy to approve the amount.
So you're proposing?
I'll second it, Chair. We were advised some time ago of the provisional nature of the fees, and it very clearly has entailed some additional work and very necessary work on this IAS 19 pensions scheme document. So I'm very happy to go along with this.
Okay, thank you for that. So, okay, so it's been proposed and second. All in favour?
Unanimous.
Thank you. That's passed. Item 7. Item 7, external audit strategy memorandum. So again, I'm bringing in Gavin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Our audit strategy memorandum is effectively our audit plan for the year. It is a new year and we are sort of gearing up now to the delivery of the audit of the 2019-20 financial statements. It'll be our second year as your external auditor. I'll draw your attention to one or two things in the report as we go through it. So if you are following it in your packs, on page 13 we have a summary. And this sets out the key areas of our responsibilities, the primary ones being to give an opinion on your financial statements and also to give a value for money conclusion. And I'll say a little bit about each of those areas as I go through this brief presentation. The thing I'd like to particularly draw to your attention on page 13 is the point that as external auditors we give reasonable and not absolute assurance about the financial statements being free from material misstatement, and the primary responsibility for the financial statements, for the Council's own systems of internal control and its governance, rest with management and those charged with governance, which are the councillors and the members of this committee and other members of the Council. I think it's important to bear that in mind. I'll say a little bit first now about the work that we do on the opinion on the financial statements that we give. And I think the best way to describe that is to look at our diagram on page 15, which sets out the work that we carry out in this sort of quadrant diagram at the bottom of page 15 in your packs. So what we've done at the moment is we've concluded our initial planning, which has resulted in the presentation of this audit strategy memorandum. In the next few months we'll be going through other areas of early work that we can do in relation to your arrangements, and the real fun starts when we receive your draft financial statements at the end of May, because we have to once again, and I can't remember if it's the second or third time that we're being required to sort of the deadlines come forward, but we have to carry out the audit, complete the audit by the end of July. That's the requirement that's placed upon us, and it is a real challenge to do that, even with the best cooperation from officers, and we do feel as though we get that here. It is a real challenge for auditors and all audit firms to deliver to that very tight deadline. Not that it's difficult in any one particular authority, it's just having to do it everywhere at the same time. But we feel as though it worked very well last year with the arrangements we have here with officers, and we're gearing up to doing the same again and achieving the deadline. So the key point for us is receiving those draft statements and then getting stuck into the detailed work that we carry out on those statements, because we do put them through significant testing. We still carry out significant challenge around the assertions within the Council's financial statements. And then the idea will be to come, we normally come, I think, to the full Council when we present our audit completion report at the point that you're about to approve your financial statements. So the intention once again will be to do that before the end of July, and for the audit to be signed off by the 31st of July. That's the targets we're working to. In terms of the opinion audit, the significant risks that we've identified are set out on page 18 of our document. These are risks which are typical of audits of local authorities. The management override of controls is a significant risk that has to be considered by auditors on all audits, and this is the risk that however good the systems that the Council has in place, management is in a unique position where, should they choose to do so, they could override controls. And we carry out specific audit testing to ensure that that hasn't happened, and that's why that's a significant risk. The other two significant risks that are highlighted are areas of particular focus in the financial statements around valuations of property, plant and equipment, and the defined pension benefit liability valuation. These are areas that involve the use of experts, sometimes external experts. They're areas that involve a lot of judgment and estimation techniques, and they're also particularly significant values in the Council's financial statements. So for those reasons, they are a particular area of audit focus, and we've set out in our plan some of the specific things that we'll do to address those significant items of account in your financial statements. Just like to move to the value for money conclusion. I always preface any comments on the value for money conclusion with the reminder that our conclusion is not a conclusion on whether the Council provides value for money. that would require an awful lot of work well beyond the sort of audit fees that we're working to. Rather than that, it's a review of the council's arrangements to ensure that the council has proper arrangements in place to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of its resources. And as is set out on page 20 of the report, we look at 3 key areas. Does the council make informed decisions, so informed decision making? Sustainable resource deployment. Has the council sustainable resources? And as you can imagine, over the last years of austerity, this is an area of particular focus for auditors of all local authorities. And the final area at the moment is working with partners and other third parties. We've identified a significant value for money risk, and you must understand in this context, the risk that we're identifying is not the risk that you have poor arrangements or don't have arrangements in place. It's the risk around us making the right conclusion, reaching the right conclusion on your arrangements. And the risk that we've identified is around financial sustainability, as you can probably imagine, given the years of austerity which I've just mentioned earlier. So there are a number of issues around finances in local government. We've had years of austerity. We have a provisional settlement at the moment that is a little bit more positive than what has gone before, but there is still considerable uncertainty facing the council and all of the sector really, in terms of it's very difficult to take a medium-term financial view when you only know at any one time what your funding is for the next financial year. And it's going to be very difficult for the council to plan for the future until that clarity comes on having a settlement for 3 or 4 years. And for various political reasons, and that clarity hasn't emerged yet. And 2021, the financial year we're going into, you're going to have an annual sort of settlement without that vision of the future. So it makes it very difficult to plan new initiatives in that context, particularly off the back of a long period of austerity where the council's had to make savings, particularly in the context of the council facing various financial challenges. So the one that we're really aware of at the moment and have sort of been looking at as you reach your decisions around it is the financial pressures around waste collection and recycling, which is something where you've considered the impacts of the sort of new contractual arrangements that you're putting in place. So it remains a tight and difficult position. We feel as though the council manages the position that it faces and the difficulties that it faces well, but there's absolutely no room for complacency going forward. The council does need to continue that careful financial management going forward, and we're confident that the council will do that and has a good record of doing that. And we look forward to the day when the medium-term position is clearer and the council can start making the decisions that it clearly wants to make in terms of investment and moving things forward. So we will, as part of the audit, update our understanding of medium-term financial plans. I know the Head of Resources will be refreshing the medium-term financial strategy as far as is possible with all that uncertainty in the near future, and we'll be looking at that as part of the budget round that the council's going through, and we'll report appropriately when we come to produce our audit completion report at the end of July. So that's the value for money conclusion part of our work. Just a few closing comments in particular areas. We set out our audit fees on page 22. The audit fees are set by public sector audit appointments, so not within our gift. What's set out there in terms of the main audit is last year's fee with the variation, but now that's reset, so we're back to the base fee, which is 29,487 in this council's case. And we've also recorded for the first time that we'll be carrying out some non-core audit work in the sector we call non-audit work, which is around the housing benefits assurance, subsidy assurance process. You had other arrangements in place with another supplier last year. We've tendered for and won the work for the 2019-20 year. Whenever we do any non-audit work, we consider whether it's sort of appropriate to do so. So from an ethical sort of standpoint, there are no ethical issues in us carrying out that work as well as being your auditor. It's common practice for that to be the case. There are no conflicts of interest or anything like that, so I just wanted to highlight that for you. On page 23 we also set out more generally our commitment to independence. We auditors, external auditors hold dear their independence, and I certainly do. We're constantly reviewing our independence and making sure that we apply the right ethical standards that are expected of us, and we're confident that we do so and that we are appropriately independent of the council and can report objectively to the council. And that's really important to us. Pages 24 and 25, there's quite a lot of detail in there, but the point I would want to draw to your attention, this is around materiality and the auditor's approach to materiality. It comes back to this thing about we don't give absolute assurance, we give reasonable assurance that the statements are financially, materially correct. And that sets out our approach to materiality, because we can't possibly review everything the council does, so we sample test. We have guidelines in terms of the significance of transactions that we look at, and that sets that out in more detail, but I won't go into that detail now, but always happy to answer questions on it. And that concludes the comments that I wanted to make in relation to our plan. Once again, I'd be very happy to take any questions or listen to any of members' comments or observations on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Gavin. Very, very thorough, as I feel. It sounds better when somebody's picking out points that can be more clarified for the understanding of what is in quite a very concise report. I'll move to Councillor Flitter. Could I?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, well, I agree. It was a good report. Thank you for that and for the work that's being carried out. But I was looking just at your audit scope, and I was wondering about how things were affected there. Because within the wording of the first paragraph of there, you talk about issues that are affected by management judgment and estimation of new policies, new accounting procedures, and many other things of operations within the council. Well, I was interested, although we know that you put so many recommendations down, and we always follow those as a council, are there any issues where new legislation has come in that perhaps staff and yourselves don't quite see things the same way, and how do you deal with that? You know, what is the outcome of issues like that, if there are any?
Thanks for that. That's a really good question. I think there's quite, despite being objective and independent, there's quite a lot of consistency in views between your senior officers and ourselves. We can see that this is a well-managed organisation, that it's prudent and acts appropriately and pays due consideration to the financial position, to the sort of any other issues. There aren't actually that many new requirements this year impacting around the accounts. But I suppose what we do look at is how the council is meeting the challenges that it does face. And I was just saying to officers this afternoon, actually, your chief executive and head of resources, how the waste collection and recycling report that was considered by the council, in terms of that area around councils making informed decisions, that was a really good example, in my view, of a report that was taken to the council that set out all the appropriate considerations, didn't bring in anything that was irrelevant, was a really wide-ranging consideration of all the issues that were involved, and gave the council really good information on which to make an appropriate judgment. And those are the kind of things that we're looking for. Don't get me wrong, if there was ever a disagreement, we would, with our independence, we would raise it, but we haven't experienced that here. I have personally experienced it elsewhere, and it's quite a difficult situation to get into. but we wouldn't hesitate from that. But to answer your specific question, we haven't got any issues at the moment with Derbyshire Dales District Council.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hobson.
Chair, I'd like to move the report. I'd like to thank Gavin and everybody from his team for all the hard work they've done. It's a comprehensive report, but I think coming along this evening and saying such positive things about our officers and our council and the way we act, it's really welcome news that we are a well-run organisation. So I'd also like to thank all our officers and team for all their hard work as well. Thank you.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I echo those comments that from you, Sue? I think they sum up the whole of our reaction to this. Is that on? No. That on now? Yeah. You know, we've always acknowledged that we have an extremely well-managed financial regime, but you know, the knowledge that we have your backing as an independent scrutineer, as it were, I think is extremely reassuring. Just picking up on what Steve said before, by the way, sometimes, you know, there is member staff disagreement about financial issues, so it's not always it's about, you know, sometimes, and you might see that a bit later if you stay to hear about fees and charges, but we'll wait to see that. However, I'd like to ask you a specific question. I've lost the thinking thing now, but it was on, it was a secondary table, I think it was page 22, about housing benefit subsidy assurance. I've not come across this before, and I think it's a new thing that we asked for. What specifically did it involve? Is this the, incidentally, is this the money that we set aside to cover discretionary payments on a housing benefit?
I'll answer that one for you. It isn't actually a new thing, although there is a new approach which was introduced for the first time from 2018-19. But essentially, this is assurance that the Department for Work and Pensions require of every council that administers housing benefits, and it involves an independent review. Usually by the auditors. This is assurance work rather than audit work on the council's arrangements, and we have to perform a prescribed range of tests on the council's administration of housing benefits. It gets down to a really granular level of detail, more granular than anything we do really, in terms of reviewing individual assessments of housing benefit on a sample basis and evaluating the impact of that and reporting to Department for Work and Pensions on that. As I say, we didn't carry out that work here. We have carried it out at 37 other local authorities this year, as ours as a firm, and it's quite a detailed set of work. You have an arrangement which is common within Derbyshire, but isn't that common more widely, where in order to manage the arrangements that you have in place, some of the initial work that would normally be done by us is done by yourselves, and then we re-perform a sample of that work. So we've tendered on that basis, because normally this work would cost quite a bit more than £5,500, because we actually have our staff sat down at sort of screens trying to work through the calculations of individual housing benefits. It's just something that the Department for Work and Pensions require. Issues can arise from it.
Does it include that discretionary refund? It doesn't. Karen's saying no.
It's more mainstream rent allowances. HRA, if you have an HRA, you would have HRA rent rebates, non-HRA rent rebates, and discretionaries. There is the War Widows pension arrangements. It does cover that. And then there's a few other sort of specific things that were required to test as part of that work. Whether it adds a lot of value, not 100% sure, but I think the real driver for it is the auditor of the Department for Work and Pensions wanting assurance on the arrangements in place for what actually adds up to be a really significant proportion of national public sector spending. It's when you add it up, because I mean typically in a sort of district council, I don't know what it is, it can be around 10 million that you in terms of benefits, and it can be sort of a lot more than that at large authorities. You're getting up into the billions nationally, and they need that, they want that assurance that it's being administered properly in each local authority.
Anyway, for the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Upon that, Councillor Ratcliffe, do you want to second it?
I will indeed, yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And we have Councillor Allison, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the financial reporting changes on page 27, which references the change to the way leases will be recorded. It says that they will now be included on the balance sheet, presumably rather than the profit and loss account. What impact will that have on the council's balance sheet? I'm asking a question in the context that the council will be taking on significant new leases with the waste contract.
Another good question. This is something that comes in not for the financial year that we're looking at the moment, 1920, but for 2021. It's likely to have quite a significant impact in accounting terms, but it is likely to be largely an on-balance sheet, sort of neutral overall impact on the bottom line position of the council, certainly, but will probably involve an awful lot of extra work by officers and by auditors. In terms of your new contract, my understanding, Head of Finances will probably want to say something, but I think you're funding those anyways yourself rather than leasing them. That's my understanding.
For the vehicles under the new contract, we are going to buy those ourselves directly. So there's no lease involved with the vehicles for the new waste contract. The only leases involved with the waste contract are to lease the depot, and then we'll pass that on to the waste contractor who will pay us a peppercorn rent.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be delighted to know that Councillor Ratcliffe asked my question. So, but I'd just like to echo what everybody else has said. Thank you, Gavin, for an excellent report, and to recognise what we know, as others have said, what a good financial office we have under Karen. So it's good to hear from an independent source. I'd just like to ask you if you'd just explain reasonableness a bit more for new members, if I may, because when I was a new council, I couldn't understand why you only get a reasonable statement. If you just expand on that a bit more, please, that would be helpful.
Okay. It's really because it would be impossible for us to give absolute assurance, because you'd have to look at everything. So the costs of doing that would be prohibitive for a start, and it wouldn't make sense to look at everything, because it would get very repetitive. So I suppose what's developed is an approach to audit that is based on reasonable assurance, materiality, sample testing, quite detailed sample testing, and auditors have methodologies for that are designed to ensure that the work that we do will identify any material misstatements.
And it's not solely applicable to Mazars, it's applicable throughout the whole industry.
Yes, it's an industry thing, but clearly auditors aren't necessarily getting a fantastic press more widely at the moment. But we do go about it in a sort of diligent way, in the way that we approach the council's audit. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favour?
Unanimous.
Thank you. Item 8, internal audit reports concluded under the 1920 operational audit plan. I think we're moving to Jenny for this.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this report, it summarises the audits that we've completed since this
committee last met, and the audit recommendations that have been implemented and those that remain outstanding. If you turn to Appendix 1 of the report, you can see this period we've issued 7 reports, 2 with substantial assurance, which is our top assurance level, and 5 with reasonable assurance. These are our top 2 categories, and we've received both of these as positive assurance. We have received responses to all 20 of the recommendations that we've made, and so management are in the process of implementing those. As they're all positive assurance, I don't have any specific concerns to raise with yourselves. I'd just like to point out that in terms of the leisure contract management audit, which is DO12, that insurance rating has improved. If you remember last time it came, it was a limited assurance, but it's now moved up to reasonable, which means it's moving in the positive direction of travel. The report also contains in Appendix 2 a summary of the status of internal audit recommendations. You can see that a large number are in green, which means that they have been implemented. So 30 have been implemented, 11 in the process have been implemented, and 22 haven't passed their implementation date, so officers will be working on those, but they've got some time yet to complete them. The oldest recommendations you can see on the first page relate to safeguarding, and that is later on the agenda for this meeting, and should help to resolve those outstanding recommendations. So the rest are progressing fairly nicely, I think, so there's nothing else I want to raise. So the recommendation is that the report be approved, and I'll try and answer any questions.
Are there any questions? No? Oh, well, thank you firstly for putting that together then, Jenny.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. No questions, Chair. Happy to move the report, but just happy also to see that the pension bond has been finally signed off by County, which raised concerns last time round. So another good report. Thank you, Chair.
Can I second that, Chair? But just say thank you for that information, Councillor Purdy, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you. Item 9, the SIP Fraud and Corruption Tracker Survey. Back to Jenny again, thank you.
Thank you. This is really just for information for members, and I thought you'd find it interesting. Each year SIP conduct a survey on the level of fraud and where fraud occurs in local government. So the start of the report, it details the main findings of the survey, and as you can see there's some large numbers with an estimated 253 million worth of fraud being detected or prevented. There'll also be quite a lot of undetected fraud. So I have just brought this as a reminder to members and officers that fraud does exist. It can take place, and officers need to be vigilant. We try and be vigilant, the external auditors are vigilant. And it's not always who you expect to commit fraud that does commit fraud, and as an external audit stated earlier, it can be senior management that have the power to override controls. So we're always looking at the segregation of duties and that isn't taking place. The second part of the report hopefully gives you some assurance that Derbyshire Dales have got fraud prevention measures in place. So that includes having detailed policies that staff are aware of, the audit plan that covers the whole organisation. We do take part in the National Fraud Initiative, the strong recruitment procedures, and various investigations. So hopefully that provides you with some assurance that the Council is doing what it can to mitigate the risk of fraud. Also, to help that, it is the timely implementation of internal and external audit recommendations. So we sort of hear quite frequently here that there are good processes in place to make sure recommendations are implemented and acted on in a timely fashion, and that also helps to reduce the risk of fraud and corruption, because that means you've got the controls in place. So the recommendation is that the results of the survey are noted, along with the fraud prevention measures that Derbyshire Dales has in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think, as you said at the beginning, Jenny, it's a pretty straightforward report, and can I just say I did breathe a sigh of relief when I realised that the picture of fraudulent activity in local government was a generalised statement and not something that either me or anyone else at this council had to be concerned about. But it's an interesting picture, isn't it? Generally, that this activity does go on to a substantial extent, and I think we've been very lucky in that, because I can't recall any cases that have particularly occurred in Derbyshire Dales. Would I be correct in that?
I'm not aware since
Yeah.
there's benefits and council tax support fraud, but outside of that, in terms of procurement, insurance, recruitment, I'm not aware of any fraud that's occurred in those areas. But there will always be sort of housing benefit investigations.
I mean, the fact that nothing has happened doesn't mean that we can be complacent, and we have some very good measures in place, so well done. I'm happy to move it. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Flitter.
Yeah, I'll second this, Chair. I sort of picked up on the same thing as Mike did on the first paragraph in the recommendations, but it is a global thing or a national thing, and it worried me because it's not fraud that's declined, it's the prevention of the prevented and detected fraud that's declined, and that sort of worried me and started me thinking about the processes. But then I was looking at the statement where you were talking about the sharing of information, and I wondered how far that went. I mean, we share information with the council tax and benefits, but does it get shared down further to within housing benefits to housing associations, or is it all just in-house?
There are rules in place for data protection that prevent us from sharing some kinds of data. The only times that I'm aware or can recall that we share data are for things like the National Fraud Initiative. So we will upload things like payments to suppliers, people on the electoral register, people in receipt of housing benefit, and they're all shared by the government. Equally, we receive information from the Department of Work and Pensions and that indicate if people have started work, so that we can then look at benefits to see if they're still claiming. But we don't generally share data across departments because data protection arrangements prevent us from doing that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Purdy.
A comment, Chair. In my previous life I dealt with two major cases. I dealt with other cases, but two major cases in particular in the police of fraud. And they were thrown out at Crown Court on bad bookkeeping. I wonder if Bazaars has got, or officers have got any comment on that. Are we looking to ensure that we've got good bookkeeping so that if there's any fraud committed, then it's not lost at Crown Court? One, in fact, was Matlock Green Garage, if you want to know.
Yeah. That's a very challenging question, and it just sent me back to quite a few years, probably a couple of decades, to parish council that I was once involved in auditing, where the parish clerk had procured his new car using parish funds.
The message there is prudence. There's got to be good bookkeeping in the event.
Well, it's interesting that in that particular case, records were really poor, and it can sometimes be quite difficult for the auditor to assess what is just poor record keeping and what is trying to conceal something. But I think the assurance that you're looking for and that I can give is you've got controls and arrangements in place and good record keeping. But it is an interesting question, and to pick up on what other people have said, we must never be complacent on these things. Thank you.
I'm not inferring bad bookkeeping,
It took me back about 30 or more years ago, until when I was training, so it was ingrained in us that as public servants you had a fiduciary duty to protect the public purse. But the kind of arrangements we have in place here, particularly over things like buying your own car, is every transaction has to be dealt with by two people. That's what you might see in Jenny's report referred to as segregation of duties. So if someone wants to raise an order, one person will raise it and a more senior officer has to approve it. So we've got those sorts of controls in place. We've also got the threat of internal audit, who do random checks, and people are aware of that. So those are the types of things we've got in place.
Thank you.
Councillor Morley.
Thank you, Chair. Not unlike Councillor Purdy, my experience of fraud was nothing so grand as Crown Court. It was to do with education and false certification, etc. But on a positive note, I think that this is also something good to say to our constituents when we're in parish council meetings, maybe, when they say, the council are spending our money. What are they spending it on? How do we know? Well, we can say, well, actually, in place there is A, B and C, and it has been to the committee, and it has been signed off, who we're using, and being new to the council last May, this is the first time I've seen this sort of document in a council situation. As I say, it's been in education before with Ofsted, but it's very heartening, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor. It has been proposed and seconded. All in favour?
It's unanimous.
Thank you. Okay, item 10, fees and charges. Who are we bringing in on that one? Karen. Oh, right, thank you, Gavin and John. We didn't give you a chance to speak tonight, did we? And Jenny, thank you very much. I'll leave it to you, Karen, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I haven't really got a great deal to add to this report. Most of the fees and charges increases are in line with inflation. Where they're not, the reasons are explained in the report. I'm happy to take any questions, and some of my other CLT colleagues here to help with that.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I just had two questions. The first is, I mean, these are very detailed questions, so I think this is a typo in the first one. And on page 96, under leases and renewals, in the first column, it says, existing 2019-2020 column, £360 plus 65 per hour, £65 per hour after 5 hours, and then the second column it says after 5 years. Yeah. And then on 99, page 99, this is really a question about whether we could provide services at a lower fee if information was readily available. I'm looking at the food premises register, and there's a photocopying charge. Now, if the I mean, I can understand why you charge for photocopying, because it takes time and it costs, and there's a charge for the materials and so on. And so I can understand why you want to charge for that. But if it was available in a digital form, it could just be emailed to somebody, or it could be available on in some other way, and at a lower cost. Are there any reasons why it can't be other information, whether there is a charge, can't be provided in that form?
That's one for me, Chair. A food premises register coming under environmental health, which is one of my services. The food hygiene courses and food premises register should actually have been deleted from this year's schedule of charges, and they were in a draft. Why they've sneaked in again, I suspect, is due to the vagaries of computers. So we will take them out. We don't do it this way anymore. They are available electronically, free of charge. Food hygiene courses, for what it's worth, we no longer offer as a council. They're available commercially out there in the real world.
Thank you for that. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions for me, Karen. Perhaps one of them might be slightly rhetorical, but we'll see. On page 79, Appendix 13, we talk about the proposed increase on the fees for the pre-application advice in planning, recommended to increase by 10%. And this is because no increases have been applied since 2017. Now, by my reckoning, that's not taking account that it's 2020 now, but in the beginning, that's around about 2% thereabouts a year. Inflation rate now is down to about 1.57%. This 10% would seem to be almost 5% a year. Now, you know, that's a sort of perhaps a reading of that. Well, that's the first one, but using that as a template, let me ask you about something else that struck my mind, which is about the leisure centres, which, because of the contracts that we drew up, we're not like to hear any prices increase proposed from them until 2021. But on the basis of the planning thing, are we expecting there to be a year-on-year cumulative increase coming along in 2021 from Freedom Leisure? Is there likely to be a storing up? Are we going to be hit with a fairly significant increase there, or will it just be an increase based on a single year of inflation and other charges?
Chair, I can answer the question in respect of planning, but not Freedom Leisure, I'm afraid. In relation to planning, it will actually be 3 years. There have been no increase for 3 years since we introduced the charges for the first time. What we wanted to do with the planning pre-application service, which is a service we don't have to offer, it is discretionary, we wanted to see how it bedded in, and it has proved to be very successful and very popular. We received income of just over £50,000 in respect to planning pre-application last financial year, and because I checked just now, I can tell you that we've got around about £34,000 in so far this year against a budget of 45. So it's popular, and our residents and developers within our area are using it. If you look through the schedule of fees, we've tried to weight it in such a way that we don't overcharge individual householders for their advice, but that we do seek to recover all the costs that we put into helping developers make their decisions about where they might like to develop and what kind of development they might like to put in. Basically, the larger charges get charged to the commercial developers rather than to householders. So it's bedded in well, and after a 3-year period, we thought we ought to review the charges. We do want to recover all the officer time that's put into that service, so we thought about a year-on-year increase, and if you compound up the interest, it does work out at around about 3% a year.
Thank you. That's a very detailed response, and I thank you for that. I take it that you are unwilling to speculate about Freedom Leisure.
Freedom Leisure doesn't fall under my services, so it's not an area I know enough about.
I'll reserve that for another occasion.
Councillor Ratcliffe, can I just stop you there? Your question as regards Freedom Leisure is going to be answered by Karen.
From Karen.
Thank you.
Well, I can try. Leisure is actually Ash Watt's service, but he's not here tonight. But I'm aware that the contract does allow Freedom to set the fees for leisure centres, and they did guarantee that they'd be frozen for year 1. But any proposed fees they come up with do have to be approved by the council's contract manager, so we will have some input into those. I'm sure that they will try to increase them to catch up with inflation, but having said that, leisure centre fees are very competitive. They're in a market where there is competition from other leisure centres and facilities, and particularly for gym fees, which is one of the reasons why they agreed to freeze them in the first place.
I mean, the thing I would say in their defence is that we are getting an extremely good service from them, and I think the management of the Matlock Arc is creditable. As a regular user, you know, I have direct experience. Can I ask you a slightly rhetorical question, which is related to your assessment, your financial risk assessment, where, and I'll read some things out for you. There is an expectation that inflation will increase following the UK's exit from the EU. It is hoped that customer resistance to the proposed fees will not be significant. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong. Yeah, my question is about this customer resistance will not be significant. Now that does, the way it's written, imply that there will be some decrease.
Well, generally, if prices do go up, it does cause people to question their use of the service. So I think if we're being realistic, we need to recognise that does happen.
Yeah, and you always build that in, do you?
Well, what I'm saying here is that because they're relatively low, mostly at 2%,
yeah.
We don't think that there will be a big impact on customers.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy with the report. Thank you.
Councillor Westman.
I'll second it.
Has anybody else got anything to add? Councillor Flitter.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this is a good report in some sense. For once that haven't got any real concerns about increases. I think 2% is very modest. And I think that the areas where we need to recuperate costs for services are reasonable. I mean, there are issues around car parking permits that I could bring up yet again, but we've done that, we've lost that argument, and we move on. But I would just like to make a point that, and thank our officers, because it proved to me last year that they are human. And it came to a case where there was one of my residents that could not renew the, or he'd changed address and he couldn't apply for another tax disc because he'd been in hospital. And once that information had gone forward, the officer was very sympathetic about that. And it wasn't just a case of being black and white. You haven't done it in a time scale, therefore you must pay. So I was very impressed with that coming forward, and it just does prove that you know, we're all human. The one thing that I would like to know, and it's come about a time or two, is it just down to staff time? Or when you talk about things like pest control, how do we judge the cost of pest control? Do we base it on hourly rate and that type of thing, or is there, and materials of course, but there are people out there offering the same service a lot cheaper. So I'm just wondering how we actually come to the prices that we do. I know we've got concessions, but they don't always come into being.
Is Tim or Paul?
Well, pest control is another of Ashwatch's services, but I have done it in the past. Yeah, pest control, for example, you'd look at the hourly rate and you'd look at the materials. The council is sometimes cheaper and sometimes more expensive than commercial operators in respect of a number of different things. Members will remember we talked about the relative costs in relation to public conveniences, for example. We have overheads that we have to factor in, which are not always true of sole traders, for example. So with pest control, you're basically looking at poison, you're looking at a van, and you're looking at a man, and those are the kind of things that are factored in and worked out to a reasonable cost. What Ash will have tried to do in all this was to look at all the calls for service and the amount of resource that goes into that service, and we'll have tried to break even. That's what we do in respect of all our discretionary services. We try and make sure that they pay for themselves.
Thanks for
Councillor Slack, did you have any questions?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for a very good report, the officers. I'm pleased to see again that we're freezing the market stalls at Bakewell. It is one of the highest in the areas we already know, so we're pleased to see that, and hopefully in the coming years it will be kept to inflation rate, any increases. Also, looking at the annual permits for residents-only car park, it's now risen to £348, which is a significant amount over the last few years. It's a very, very large amount. Will it be kept to inflation rate in future, or will you jump above inflation rate on this?
I'm sorry, were you asking about the residence permits?
Yeah, the annual permit residents-only car park, £348.
Within the report, it refers to an earlier report that went to Community Environment Committee, where
but what I'm asking is, will that...
after that, it's expected to only be inflation.
You keep it to inflation rate, so, you know, it's a substantial amount to keep rising each year for residents. Thank you.
Councillor Hobson.
Chair, it was echoing actually what Councillor Slack had said about it's good to see that we're supporting Bakewell stall markets last year and this year. Thank you.
Right, moving on then, we had the proposer and the seconder. All in favour? Unanimous.
Thank you. That's moved. Item 11, reward and recognition policy. Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. This is a brand new employment policy, one which we've not had before, indeed one which other councils don't necessarily have, but we felt it was an important policy to bring forward as part of our work with staff and our staff survey action plan. It's been developed in consultation with the employee group and then consulted with all staff. And it's been an excellent opportunity to write up what we do with regard to reward, both pay and non-pay, and also the excellent work that's going on with recognition, but to build upon that. So if it's approved tonight, then the policy, if any changes to the policy statement happen in future, it would come back to committee. If there's any changes to the guidance notes, then that can be approved by corporate leadership team. Finally, to say that joint consultative group who've considered this policy do recommend that you adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is another very good report. I have a general question, and this is a question that has arisen from my work as a consultant and having to write policies to bid for public sector jobs and so on. And what I found is that there are a lot of policies available on the internet for doing various things. And, for example, Councillor Morley referred to education. Every school seems to have policies for this and policies for that, and they each write their own independent policies. And it seems to me that there's a lot of duplication in the UK in policy preparation, whereas in fact there could be coordination. This is a general question. It's not about your particular policy, but in preparing policies, is there a possibility, or do council officers already collaborate with other councils in order to prepare common policies that will apply more generally?
Happy to answer that from a human resources point of view, because I'm part of the Derbyshire Personal Officers Group, which is all the Derbyshire councils together, and we do share policies and help each other to draft policies. When I started to write this one, my first thought was, does anybody else have a reward and recognition policy? I couldn't find one to actually plagiarise or build upon, so this is work from scratch. But usually we do try and share work and use good work that other people have done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Purdy.
Well, I want to thank Deborah for bringing this forward. I think it shows the teamwork that is in this council establishment and the teamwork ethos that we want to build. And so obviously you've gone down to the ground level, come back up, and so I wish you luck and I hope other authorities follow suit. Move it, Chair.
You'd like to move it? Thank you. Does that find a seconder? Ooh, we're all on it, aren't we? Councillor Slack, we'll go.
Sorry.
No, I'll tell you what, no, we'll change that. We'll go Councillor Allison, she'd like to second that. Would you like to speak as well? Thank you.
Question, actually. That's quite my hand up to ask a question. My question relates to the increments that staff achieve on the baseline for their particular grades. Is that linked in any way to their performance?
No, it's not. It's actually part of the Green Book Terms and Conditions of Local Government Employment, and it's about being time served, so we don't do performance-related increments here.
Is that something that you're considering in the future?
No.
Thank you.
Councillor Donnelly.
Yeah, Chair, I was going to second this, but maybe part of the consultative group that discussed this, and I think it is an excellent document, and I'm very happy to support it.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's an excellent report, really, Chair, this is, and as the gentleman seconded it.
Yes, I've given the honour to Councillor Harrison to second it. Yes, thank you, Councillor Slack. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Maybe at some point we could introduce a policy for shared seconding.
I'm leaving it quite open to you.
But I actually wanted to support what our esteemed leader said before. Just say leader there, didn't it? Yeah. Said before about the importance of the staff that work for this council. You know, to recognise and reward staff's achievement and dedication, I think is a significant part of inculcating an organisational cohesion and corporate togetherness. I'm using very long words, I know, I'm being a bit eloquent, but the success and public approval of any council comes not from what I or perhaps others do around this chamber as councillors, but from what staff are doing on a daily basis to provide the services that gain us the public's approval. And that's what's so important. So this is a very, very important policy. And I'm slightly surprised almost, that we haven't had it before. I'm sure it's been there under the surface, and I'm sure managers constantly, praise there. But to have something substantial, I think, is very good. And sometimes, incidentally, I think to myself that this sort of thing should be within the corporate plan in some respects. We seem to forget that this is a corporation, if you like, in some degree, and the staff are an essential element of that, and they ought to have a place there. But that's for another day and another argument, perhaps.
Thank you, Councillor Ratcliffe. Councillor Hobson.
Chair, I'm pleased to see that there's recognition in various ways that can be given. I know when we had the recent flooding, people on the ground were recognised for all their hard work. But I'd just like to say a big thank you to the officers. I know some of the officers worked day and night during that flooding to support those people on the ground. So, one team, one council, let's all work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate on this. I think it is a very good policy. It obviously isn't all about money policies and rewarding with monetaries. It's all about just being able to just say thanks very much for doing that at the time. Yes, the staff are here, they do get paid, it is their job, but sometimes just the acknowledgement that they've gone up and over beyond their recognition, then it needs to be looked into, and I think this is a very good policy. So with that in mind, Councillor Donnelly, who proposed it, we've got Councillor Allison, all in favour? Thank you. Now we move on to the family-friendly policy. Again, Deborah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yes, another new employment policy, and whilst we've long had a maternity scheme, with perhaps 1 or 2 employees going on maternity leave each year, we've actually relied on gov.uk guidance for paternity, shared parental leave and adoption schemes because they were quite rarely asked for. But actually in updating the maternity scheme, we thought it was about time to have a one-stop shop really for staff to get access to all that information very easily on the intranet. So this family-friendly policy now covers all those areas. Again, if approved tonight, any changes to a policy statement would be brought back, but any changes to the guidance notes, perhaps through learning of implementing the policy or legislation, will be approved at CLT. And again, JCG have looked at this and recommend that you adopt the policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. This is probably a party political point, but never mind.
Oh, well, in which turn I turned those off.
No, the point I'd like to make, or the question I'd like to ask at this stage is whether, in view of the prospective members of the current government have made about changes to employment law and regulation, how will this policy, how do you think this policy will be maintained in the future? And I do think it's an excellent policy, and I'm very pleased to see that you brought it forward tonight.
Deborah?
I think the view is that with Brexit and so on, actually very little employment law will change because a lot of it is sound legislation. But obviously, as part of my professional remit, I need to keep abreast of what's going on in employment law. And if anything were to change, then bring it back to CLT and update the policy.
Councillor Morley.
Thank you, Chair. A very detailed policy that I'd like to support. And also I am delighted that we've not gone down the United States of America route and have duvet days. So I'm very pleased to see that that's not in here. I think it's also something like this, I think is heartening for the employees to see that they are cared for and that their families are taken into consideration, and I'm more than happy to move this, Chair.
Thank you. Do we find a seconder?
I'd like to second.
Councillor Hughes. Thank you. Moved. Anybody else wishing to make a comment? Upon that is, oh, sorry, Councillor Allison.
Just wanted to ask, how many times has somebody asked for shared parental leave in the organisation, and has that been granted?
I think it's only once, and the answer is yes.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Thank you. We're going to just have a bit of a change. We're going on to the sheet that you've been given, 12A, the amendment to the scheme of delegation. It's been moved to 12A. Yeah. Sorry.
We're doing it now.
Yeah, it's going in now. So we're going to move to, is it Deborah again? Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you very much for taking the item as an urgent item. I hope everybody's had the chance to have a look at it. So everybody happy to continue with the conversation and we've read it. So the reason that it is an urgent item is that we've actually got a case that we need to resolve within timescales, and we need to do that before the next committee. It's a claim for an ex-employee to have a pension released on grounds of ill health retirement. And it's very rare that this happens, and we've had to appoint an adjudicator, and that appointment needs to be part of the scheme of delegation.
Councillor Purdy.
It goes without saying, Chairman, that this obviously needs to be moved, so I'm happy to move it.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Yes, Chair, I'll certainly second it. Once I realised what the paper was about, that UREGENC.
Yes.
wasn't a medical complaint. I had every confidence.
So other than that issue, then you're quite happy to second it.
That's great, yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Anybody else making any comments other than the typos? Within that, then it's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Thank you. Thank you. Now we move on to item 13, Derbyshire Dales Safeguarding Policy. Members update. That's from Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm introducing this on behalf of Ash, who is responsible for the policy. Members may recall that back in July you considered the safeguarding policy, and there was some considerable debate in committee about how that should go forward. What was agreed is that authority would be delegated to Ash in his role to move on with the policy following consultation with one particular Councillor Raw. Those conversations have taken place, and the amendments to the policy are detailed at paragraph 1.4. The reports really come before committee tonight to let you know that conversation has taken place. The policy has been adopted under the delegation given to Ash, and we're now moving forward with it as an organisation. Members will be aware that training is programmed in for yourselves in the not too distant future as well. I'm happy to take any questions back to Ash, but nothing much to answer.
Everybody okay with that? So with that, could I find a proposer? Councillor Slack. And a seconder is Councillor Morley. With that, are we all in favour? Thank you. Unanimous.
Item
14. Proposed licence to undertake works at Unit 16 on Blenheim Road at Ashbourne Airfield.
This is me again, Chair, but I'm still scrolling. Bear with me a second, please.
Okay.
Right, I'm there. Okay, this is a report that will enable us, if granted, to put the arrangements in place to carry out work to improve the drainage at Blenheim Road. This is part of the wider project to improve the situation down at the industrial estate, to enable it to expand, and so on and so forth. And we really need to get our ducks in a row so that we're ready to go when the project's ready to move. As I understand it, the County Council have now got an approved contractor to work under the scheme, and we're anticipating the scheme will take place in the autumn of this year. It's a little bit of an estimate at this stage, but that's what we're working towards. So really we're just asking for authority to move forward with the licence so that we can get the arrangements in place when the scheme's ready to roll.
Any questions from anybody for that? It's been moved. Find seconder?
I'll second, Chair.
Councillor Donnelly. Been moved and seconded. All in favour? Thank you. Item 15. She says. Risk assessment management. No, risk management. Sorry. Paul.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The Council's risk management policy requires me to report to you on an annual basis in regard to the organisational key risks, and to identify to you how we're actually managing those risks within the organisation. So the report attached identifies those strategic risks that we have currently identified and their corresponding scores, with high risks being red, medium risks being yellow, and low risks being green. And it also identifies the mitigation measures which we are undertaking in order to bring those risk scores down to what is considered to be an acceptable level. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Are there any questions? Councillor Allison, thank you.
Regarding the scoring of the risks, how are those figures achieved? How are they calculated?
The risk management policy includes a scoring matrix, if you like, in terms of the severity of the impact, the reputational damage, the financial impact upon the organisation, and basically looking across those factors, you multiply the various risks together to end up with a key score.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ratcliffe, question?
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me, Paul, if you will, because the questions I'm asking are really for my clarification, in a sense, of the underlying issues around what you've said on your risk assessment. I mean, for instance, if I start on page 16 about the assessment on risk involving planning and the local plan. And about the assessment of risk, if you like, if this council becomes more demanding of housing developers in terms of the quality of the development. Just recently, I think, myself, I've detected a mood in council that we should be stronger, for instance, on what we would like as the outcome on quality development, particularly in light of climate change and the needs to make sure that houses, which is one of the number one determinants, for instance, if you like, of carbon emission, etc., and energy, certainly energy use there. So that's a first one, if you want to just say something about that to begin with.
Yes, I can perhaps explain. Obviously the local plan is one of the Council's key policy documents. So as a strategic policy document, it clearly carries a degree of risk, because the key purpose of the local plan is to make sure that your planning decisions are in accordance with the development plan policies that you've adopted, and that the objectives of the local plan in terms of its delivery, particularly around housing targets, are being achieved. Okay. So whilst the local plan contains a policy framework, members clearly will determine applications in the context of that policy framework. Where the risk starts to increase is when you are making planning determinations which are out with that policy framework, such that if you try to refuse planning applications when you don't have the backing of policy support, be that national policy support or local plan policy support, that's when the risk increases. So the issue that members are concerned about and wanting to address, it's quite legitimate to try and address that, so long as you stay within the confines of the policies that you've got. Now clearly there would appear to be emerging aspirations to actually further improve our planning policies, and that's quite legitimate, but that would need to be done in the context of a revision to the local plan. So this risk is really about, is the local plan delivering what it says it's going to deliver? And principally it is around housing targets.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. My second one is on page 14 about resources, capacity and capability. I read from the bottom of the page, there is a risk that too much focus on new projects will leave little capacity for ongoing service issues. Now, I appreciate what you've said, and I'm, as much as anybody, aware that we are extremely constrained, principally engendered by an undercutting on our funding and the financial resources that we can use to bring in concrete measures, as it were. However, I have a slight contradiction at the back of my mind, because I know, and I'm pretty sure I'm correct in this, that the peer challenge review, one of its comments was that we are perhaps a little too risk averse when it comes to investment and doing things in a proactive way. And I don't want to feel that I'm overly constrained. I appreciate what you're saying about the risks, etc. But I just feel that somehow, if we put too much accent on that, we're always going to have those breaks. We're always going to have those reins pulled back. I mean, how do you feel about that as a member comment? Do you think I'm being too... What do you feel?
No, Chairman, I think that is an entirely legitimate view for members to take. And members perhaps haven't had the opportunity yet, but the Council agenda next week, there is a very detailed report that I've presented on the whole issue of resilience, resources and priorities. And that report seeks to respond to the comments made by the peer challenge team. It seeks to respond to the emerging issues arising from our corporate plan discussions with various groups, and it puts some proposals in front of you next week which do ask you whether you wish to commit further resources within this organisation. Now, as head of paid service, it's my responsibility to evaluate, if you like, what the capacity of this organisation is, and to give you an honest view as to whether I think this organisation can deliver what you want us to deliver. And that's the very basis of the report next week before you. So once you've had an opportunity to have a look at that, hopefully that will give you some of the assurance that we are taking this very seriously. But I think the underlying issue behind all of this really is the corporate plan.
Yeah.
Because the corporate plan is the start of how this organisation's resources are to be utilised to address what this council wants to achieve over the next 4 years. And the difficulty with the environment that we're in local government and the financial situation is we have to prioritise. And unfortunately, not everything can be a priority. As a council, we are going to have to decide what do we seriously want to address and what are we prepared to accept in terms of what the lower priorities may be. Because unless we are able to prioritise, we do run the risk of diluting our resources so finely that actually we achieve very little. So that's why the importance of the corporate plan discussion and the next coming weeks really will be crucial to how this organisation does move forward.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Paul, for your answers. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you.
I know there's others.
Okay, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to report that I've asked Steve Capes if he could produce an estimate for the amount of resource, human resource, that can be put into developing the actions that come out of the corporate plan, because that gives us as members a better way of then determining priorities for the corporate plan. And I think the previous discussions that we had didn't include that understanding of the amount of officer time that could be spent on any new projects over the next few years. So I'd be grateful if he was able to do that for the meetings that we're going to hold on the corporate plan later in this month. Thank you.
That is certainly something that the corporate leadership team has been looking at in terms of what resource capacity we have, where can we free up additional capacity, and above and beyond that, where do we actually need to think about bringing additional resources in to deliver on many of the issues that members would like us to deliver on.
Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have to say quite categorically here and now that the lead group has submitted its views on the corporate plan. I expect those to be carried forward. And we kept them simple for the very reason that's been talked about tonight, that there are aspirational messages coming out that are not sustainable for this council. So that's why our lead group kept it simple: review the Green and Clean team, build new houses, build new businesses. And I think, therefore, I remind Councillor Hughes of the conversation we had following the Leaders Advisor Group, that we agreed the bare bones of the headlines, did we not? And that the officers could then go away and put detail onto the corporate plan, which is why extra meetings have been enabled by Steve. And this is also contingent to the budget. We need to see what's agreed on the corporate plan, so then monies can be put to that. So I think it's important that Paul puts in the risks, absolutely right, because I don't want to see this council stagnate. As the lead group, I want to see us take on some initiatives for the betterment of the people of Derbyshire Dales. But there is a risk to it because of the financial situation. And as been expressed by Mazars tonight, we're still in the difficult position that the government spending review is only notified for this year. So we don't know what position we're going to be in the subsequent years. But as leader, I don't want this council to stagnate. I want to start developing, progressing, building. But we do it prudently. We do it with the benefit of the experience of our officers, and we do it all as one team, hopefully.
Thank you. Anybody else wishing to make any comments? With that, I'm looking for a mover of this recommendation.
I move it, Chair.
Councillor Purdy. Councillor Wakeman, did you like to second it? So it's been proposed and seconded. All in favour? Thank you. Item 16, the joint consultancy minutes.
So we're just receiving the minutes from this meeting. So I think it's all self-explanatory. So could I find a mover for this, please?
I'll move, Chair.
Councillor Flitter, sorry.
No, I was wanting to make a point. I'm not going to second it because I wasn't here.
No,
and that, Chair, is the point that I'm disappointed yet again. I gave ample notice that I was away for an extended holiday, giving the dates, but my apologies don't seem to have been recorded on any of the notes, including this one you've got before you tonight.
Okay, so if I find the proposer for this, then will they agree to doing it? So Councillor Donnelly, are you proposed to put this in?
Yeah.
And obviously we'll need to look into this a little bit deeper for other meetings if that's the case. Councillor Swindle, did you wish to make a comment?
Second Chair.
You would like to second it? Okay, thank you very much for that. So it's been proposed and seconded for the minutes. All in favour? Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. That closes the meeting tonight. Thank you very much for all your attendance. Good night.